Hello, and welcome back to the sim. In this one, we're on the ground in KLAX again with the 777. And we're going to be hopping in with SPAD.next and setting up our TCA Captains Airbus Pack. Hey, some people fly with it, so let's get it set up. So I like to do everything running on the runway. Asked sometimes in the questions and the comments is, hey, the reversers aren't working for me. So when I do this, the reversers don't work for me. How come? And sometimes we end up getting through the questions and then eventually find out literally they were cold and dark and wondering why things didn't work properly. Please get yourself loaded up, fully running on the runway, ready for takeoff. That way all the systems and configuration are going to be ready to go. Jumping into the SPAD.next portion with PMDG 777, please, if you haven't, you must watch the first video, which is how to configure the SDK. If you haven't configured the SDK, there are going to be things that don't work, and it's going to be confusing because events will still trigger, but your data or events that are doing conditions are not going to trigger because it can't read the data. You got to be on 0.9.17.4. Ignore the beta. It is fully released. I'm just still on the beta channel, so therefore I don't have an update. So I'm running the same thing as everybody else. It is fully released software. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we have a profile. You'll notice I created a Microsoft Flight Sim PMDG 777 profile. For a lot of people, it's simple. You come in here, take one of your old profiles that you already had, like for me, the 737, and I'm going to create a new profile from this. You'd hit the button, and then I renamed it 777, and then it gave me a new profile. And then, of course, I started adding my aircraft assignments. So here, all my liveries for the 777, I can just click here, hit the button, and now all those liveries which I have loaded in the sim are going to automatically switch when I load into one of those planes. Now, let's head on over to our joysticks because that's where we find the TCA 320 pilot stick. So I have my pilot stick set up as a captain stick, so it's on the left-hand side of me. It's real simple. I take that button, click on it, then we click on online snippets. Then what you want to do is you want to come in here and you want to come to complete device. And if you just want to get my device, you could search through all this, or you can type in my name, Les O'Reilly, and then you're going to find TCA 320 Captain PMDG 777 or snippet 11,423. Yes, there are that many snippets out there in the system. So this is a complete device snippet. I'm going to click OK, and then it's going to ask you, do you want to replace all events? So if I hit yes, it will fully replace every event and wipe out anything that was already assigned there. If I hit no, it's going to merge it. So it's going to add all the events from that snippet to anything I already have. And of course, cancel will do nothing. So in my case, I already have it all, so I don't need to pull it down. Now, one thing you're going to see a lot of with my controls when it comes to some of these joysticks is vJoy button. We have a separate video on vJoy linked here. Go ahead and jump into that video afterwards if you want. vJoy is a fantastic way because sending keyboard events can have problems with focus and them getting lost or captured, whereas we configure vJoy directly inside of the sim. Real quick, little sidestep, what do I mean by that? In Microsoft Flight Sim, what you're going to find under control options is once I've installed my vJoys and enabled them, watch another video for that, I actually have a device configuration that I use. And so you'll see that I have a whole lot of buttons. So here I've even got vJoy buttons for controlling the ATC radio panel. That way I could control that ATC panel because, of course, the original events didn't work because they changed them. We've got camera switches. So for switching modes between drone mode, I used button 127, and the external view mode is 128. For my instrument views, I mapped those using the 20s. 12, 11, 10, 13, 20. So I have all of these instrument views mapped to those vJoy buttons, and there you go. Then for fixed camera views, we have the fixed camera views. Again, we went with button 51 through 50. That gives us camera 10, just because I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, and I ran out and I went, well, I'll just use 50. External camera, so you're going to find to toggle the external view, joystick button 125. So another button for toggling into external camera, and then we've got 1 through 7 for the external views. You can reset the external view with button 7. And then I've got my cockpit camera. So VFR Pilot View Save. So that's your default pilot view. If you want to adjust yourself in the cockpit, you actually use the VFR Pilot View Save. So I have this in my Stream Deck with all my views and everything else, so that I can move myself in the plane, get myself situated where I like the default view to be, and then I go ahead and I save it using VFR Pilot View Save. Once you've done that, that will be saved with that camera file, and everything will be back when you hit the reset button. So it always comes back there. I threw toggle smart camera on button 11, and then you can see toggle cockpit view, that's 126. And then you've got the save custom cameras 0 through 9. So I put those in the 40s. And so this is so that you can save them. So I have a page for saving my custom views, and I have a page for recalling those custom views. And so then you've got, of course, resetting the cockpit view, previous pilot position, next pilot position. I gave those some vJoy buttons. Then we got the load custom cameras. I put those in the 30s. It's just where I ended up going with them. And then we've got all the quick views as well. Those are set up. I got the quick view set up. And so those go on the hat switch. And so I did all this so that they're buttons and they're virtualized, because also if you click out of the sim, your joysticks won't control. What's great about putting that control on SPAD.next is I can be inside of another application and my joysticks are still going to send events into the sim. I don't need to be in focus. So huge value in why we do this stuff inside of SPAD.next. Why also did I use button 101? Well, button 101 is my push to talk that I have mapped inside of vPilot. And so that way, whether I'm using a side stick, I'm using a yoke, or I've got multiple side sticks and yokes connected at the same time, I don't have to go in and constantly change vPilot for which control before I fly. They all can trigger the vJoy button, and then vPilot never changes being on button 101. Button number 2, this is the button above the push to talk. So push to talk is the trigger. Right above that is a small button, and so you can click on it. I actually use that button as a modifier. So what you'll see here for button 3, which is the black button, so it's the left side of the stick, I've got it that it checks button number 2. And if button number 2 is not pressed, then it's going to press and release vJoy 127. Then what we've got is transponder ident. Hold it for a long time. This will trigger ident. And then if I'm holding the button down, so holding button number 2 down when I tap button number 3, this is going to be vJoy button 7, which is the one that I mapped for resetting my view. You holding down button number 2 and I'm clicking on my hat switch, you can see that this does views. Whereas when I'm not holding down button number 2, the hat switch is actually going to run trims. And we'll get to that in a moment. So right now, if I was looking somewhere else in the cockpit and I wanted to reset my view, right? Hold down button number 2 and tap button number 3, and it would reset my view for me. Button number 4, that is our autopilot disconnect. So if we tap it for a short time, so a short button press, less than 1 second, it's going to send the autopilot off event. And if you recall from a 777 or any PMDG, you need to press it twice to silence. So that's why you want to use the autopilot off and not the autopilot toggle, right? This is supposed to be a disconnect. And don't use the one labeled disconnect, because disconnect actually triggers the paddle. So in the sim, if you send autopilot disconnect, this is what it's actually doing, is it's turning off the disconnect switch, not pressing the yoke button. So again, always, always, always use the autopilot off. I also have it so if I hold it for a long time, it's going to turn the autopilot off and it's going to send the auto throttle disconnect button. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. None of these do I actually map to anything. These are all the buttons on the base. Feel free to map them how you like. I've got so many other controls, I just never did anything with them. You're also going to notice that these axes are not mapped. I put them inside of Microsoft Flight Sim, and that's because I actually use this joystick mostly as a tiller, and also so that I can control the camera views. And so it's very helpful for me to map that inside of Microsoft Flight Sim, even though it does mean if I'm not in the sim, clicked on the sim, it's not going to control it. But it does allow me to double map things that I wanted to do. And then the hat switch. So hat switch, if button number 2 is not held, I've got my aileron trims and I got my elevator trims. We've got pressed and we've got held. Pressed, it'll click it once. Held, it will now fire it repeatedly until I let go. Pressed and released, these are for the vJoy button press and releases, but I have to be holding down that button number 2. So by holding that down, instead I start doing vJoy buttons, which is effectively looking around the cockpit. So yeah, that's how I've got this mapped. Worked pretty well. And if you got the Captains Pack, you might as well grab it and get started. And maybe look at the vJoy one again, because that's how I've got it mapped. And you would want to map to the exact same vJoy events, so then all my snippets would work with your snippets. Moving on, let's go next to the TCA throttle. And this is the Captains Pack, so it does have the left add-on and the right add-on, and I only have one set of engine throttles. So again, click on anything, head over to online snippets. When it comes up, you want to come down to complete device, and again, just type in my name, and you're going to see all of the snippets. And there you are, Microsoft Flight Sim TCA 320 throttle quadrant with add-ons, and for the PMDG 777. So you go ahead, that's snippet 11,424. You grab that, click OK, and then again, you're going to say yes, replace all for this device. No, it'll merge all the events, so you can delete away the ones that you don't want anymore. That's always a good option. Just go through all your stuff and make sure that you delete what you don't want. When I look at the virtual buttons for the Detents, those all have nothing mapped to them. On this axis, we've gone ahead, we've got the short press is going to be the auto throttle disconnect. And if we press it for a longer time, that is going to be the TOGA switch. For our throttle, we went with add event, value axis change, add action, and we went with a standard axis throttle with reverser. So when we look at this throttle with reverser, we set it to engine 1, and then we got our full thrust at 16,384, and we set our axis value. So what did we do? We pushed the throttle all the way up and we hit set. And you'll notice I gave it a little bit of range. If it doesn't get all the way to 0, a little bit of calibration issue, it's not a big deal. Then I moved it down to idle. So idle needs to be 0. And then we set our throttle. So you'll see anywhere between 46,000 and 50,000, it is going to consider it to be idle. So I wanted it from 46,000 to 50,000 to send the 0. And then for PMDG, you need to use minus 8192 for the full reverse thrust setting. And then I just went ahead, put it all the way to the bottom, 16,535. And again, if you wanted to, you could just go ahead and change that value, and maybe you want to have it at like 400. And the reason for that is then you've, just in case it doesn't always get right down to that value, it will trigger full for sure. So that's what you need to do to get yourself into reverse thrust. So should have actually hit the copy all events. So all these events, come over here, and then I could hit the paste button, and then I would have had to change it from a 1 to a 2, from a 1 to a 2, and then we would have come in here, we would have set this to engine 2, and then again we would have come through and tweaked these. And sometimes you'll find that the idle position is a little off from each of the throttles. They're not perfectly matched, so make sure to set it up accordingly for the left and right side, so when you start moving them, they feel like they're physically together, even though their values are slightly off, and it'll smooth it out for you. And then like you saw me do here, I could just throw that to 400, right? And we hit the enter button, jump back in just to double check. Yep, it's good. So all that is done, we would click OK. For the engine switches, we went ahead with our engine switches, and we gave those a switch on is going to send the event control stand engine 1 start lever. It is 0 for the up position, and it is 1 for the down position. Now, always useful when you look at this to remember just how the events for the PMDG work. So when you're pilling in these PMDG events, and you go through your section of PMDG, it's on the control stand, engine 1 start lever, pretty easy to find. What's cool is it's how you control it. So with switches that have an on and off, and any other additional position, you set a value. And even a 7-position rocker switch like the AutoBrake, yes, you can go to a higher number, but to do that, what you tend to do is you do something like this, but then you're gonna go ahead and put like a 7 in. So you're manually putting that value. For everything else, you would come in here and you get to pick from it. So you can see here, on doesn't necessarily mean on in PMDG. Sometimes off is on and on is off. So you have to see which way does the switch move and just reverse them if they're different. But you'll also notice mouse wheel. So you could be on a button needing to send a mouse wheel event if you interact with a mouse wheel. You have button clicks, you have button releases, you have mouse moves, and of course you have the single click left button. So we use this a lot with some of the other toggle switches, and so you'll use that button a bunch too. So once you've set those, and for example, we're gonna hit the left mouse button, you notice it puts in the value that the SDK is expecting for it to be sent. So if we set this back to a 1, it only sends a 1 with it. So there you go. You would save your file and off to the races. So then we did this for engine number 2. For the middle crank switch, we went ahead, and this is for the engine auto start. So in normal mode, it is in the off position, and in the ignition mode, it is in the on position. Normal mode is auto start on, and then so ignition start, we want it to be the on, so that way it's on, and then normal mode, I set it to off, so ignition start, so start, auto start is now enabled. And then what we wanted to do for the start switches that are up here, we went ahead and we put those on these buttons. And so here it knows that button press for longer than 1 second, so we want these to require holding it down. But again, because it's a toggle button, but now we're mapping it to this toggle button, those are switches, right? And so what I needed to do was I needed to have it look at what the position of the selector currently is in. In this case, it's in 0. So obviously this is not validating right now because it's actually in the normal position. So here it's check marked because yes, this check is currently valid, and so if it's valid, we're going to then put this into the 0 position. And it's very important that you end processing with these, otherwise the first one would run and the second one would run right afterwards, especially if this turned it from 0 to a 1, this would instantly go, oh, it's a 1, back to 0, and so you would just be toggling it back and forth. So you have to end processing when you're going to use conditions of values to make sure that it doesn't run the next event. Now what you can see is I hold that down for a second, goes into the start position, hold it down for a second, it will go back into the norm position. In our left add-on, we went ahead and we used the control axis spoiler set. The reason for this is we don't want to use the arm event, so we don't use the standard axis, we use the axis spoiler set. To do that, we did an add action, a custom axis event, and then we browsed for spoiler. Just type it in, SimConnect axis spoiler set, and then we set up our values. So those values, how we set them up, range definition is no. It's going to use the -16,383 all the way up to the 16,383. And because this needs to go the opposite direction, I just went ahead, said use axis value and invert the axis. So now when we move into that first little detent, you'll notice it just perfectly aligns with the speed brake is armed. And then as we come back down, now we've got our full range. And for the throttle, since we're here, you can see that the throttles move forward, throttles move back. We've got the reversers, and of course the speed brake automatically goes out when we do the reversers. Move back up into idle, we hear the click, and then they go ahead and go back into idle. So it's perfect, works awesome. Love how it's all set up and working for us. So then when we come over here, you're going to see we've got our gear up and gear down. These use the standard gear up and gear down events. That's all you needed to do. For the auto brake, I went ahead with left to right. So it's not perfectly in line with the words that are on here, but they don't necessarily match, right? The disarm position is actually RTO. Then it goes to off. Then it goes to disarm. Then it goes and skips over 1. I've actually got it programmed to skip over 1 and go to 2. Then it goes to 3, and then it goes all the way up to max. So that's just the way I chose to do it. Only 5 selections. I needed to figure out which way was going to be the best for me. That way I look over and I can see that it's gone to the right place. So 0, 1, 2, and then we skipped over auto brake 1 setting and we sent 4 for auto brake 2. So number 2 matches number 2, 3 matches 3, so 5, and then we skipped over 4 and we went straight to max auto brake there. Jump on over to the right add-on. You're going to see we're using the flaps auto detent. So this one was real simple. You come in 16,383 to -16,383, so the standard sim event. I set 0, and then I moved it all the way to the bottom. I hit the set button. So these are all populated. I see it, and then the OK. And of course, it was backwards, and instead of changing these numbers, I just hit the invert axis on, and that solved my problem. The first click is going to get us to 1. The second click is actually going to get you all the way to 15. So for 5, you actually need to be somewhere in the middle and not all the way to a detent. So just get yourself somewhere in the middle for 5. That's going to be 15. That's going to be 20. There's your 25. So 25 is somewhere in the middle. And then all the way down 430. We've got our rudder trim left, rudder trim right. So these do use the standard sim events. Over here, we went with the rudder trim cancel. That is the left mouse click. That way we can center the trim. And then on our parking brake, we've got the event control stand parking lever 1. It's set up to set the axes. So it's going to set the brakes for us. It's going to wait. It's going to flip the lever. And then it's going to release the brake axis, and then same thing on the other side. Now, this was so that you can use the official way but still map it to a switch. However, you don't need to do this. If you go into the FMC and you tell it not be strict on the parking brake, you can just use the standard parking brake events, and that's also going to work just fine for you. Rudder, so we're moving that rudder trim. Hold it down, you see my rudder trim going out, click that reset button, and it goes ahead and sends it back to 0 for us. We've got our parking brake switch, so you can see it goes off, holds, parking brake switch comes up, pretty cool, and then it releases the axis so that it doesn't go anywhere. Well, it looks to me like while we were messing around, the plane was driving all over the airport. So let's go ahead, get this thing set up again, and take off. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and come along with us next time. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.